Hi, I'm Ben Carr, and this is the Security Get Serious podcast. Today's guest is a true trailblazer in the world of cybersecurity. Theresa Payton was the first woman to serve as White House Chief Information Officer, overseeing IT operations for President George Bush and his administration. Theresa is a former banking executive, a tech CEO, a trusted advisor to Fortune 500 boards, and a globally recognized authority on cybercrime, nation-state threats, and digital privacy. She's also no stranger to the public spotlight. You may recognize her from CBS's hit show Hunted, where she served as Chief Intelligence Officer, applying real-world surveillance and cyber tactics to track down fugitives. Whether she's testifying before Congress or helping organizations navigate ransomware, AI, and election security, Theresa brings a unique mix of technical expertise, leadership, experience, and a sharp insight into the evolving threat landscape. Theresa Payton, welcome to the show. Let's get serious.
It's great to be with you, Ben.
Yeah, happy to have you today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So, just to start off, maybe you could give everyone a little bit about your background. I mean, you've done a ton of things. Just all over the place. Great background. Can you give people just a little bit of color onto it and how you got where you are today?
Sure, absolutely. Had the great opportunity to work in financial services for 16 years. Worked for President George W. Bush from 2006 to 2008, and then had the opportunity to start my own company, Fortalice Solutions, and started it in 2009. And it's just been an incredible journey and a great honor to serve clients and my employees on this journey.
So, if I think about your career, and obviously, the thing that really stands out, I think, to a lot of people is, first woman to serve as White House CIO. How did that high pressure environment really shape your perspective on cybersecurity leadership?
It's interesting because I often used to think in financial services when bad things would happen, a fraud event, a cybersecurity incident, anything that was sort of related to our banking customers, I would think, gosh, if I could just get to our banking customers and tell them what I know, they'd be safer and our jobs would be easier and life would be better. And so I get to the White House and I'm thinking, as my briefing is changing every single day on who's targeting us and how they're targeting us and all the different attack vectors being used. And I thought I had seen a lot being in banking so long. And I thought, I'm going to fail at my job if I don't change my mindset here. Like, I can't get to everybody. They're not all here. And even though the banks were global, the pace, the operational pace, the global pace, everybody all over the world. And I thought, I'm going to fail if I've got to change how I think about this issue. And that's really when I realized that I needed to reset and always focus on the human user story, designing everything around the human. So what is the human doing before they engage technology? What are they multitasking doing while they're engaging the technology? What are they doing as soon as they leave the technology? And really thinking long and hard about that, and then weaving security in to that story. And that really changed my mindset of like, oh, I have to brief them and tell them every day what I know. It just made a huge difference in sort of my ability to have more wingspan to lead and to guide and coach and mentor my staff to think differently. And we got a lot accomplished, always starting off with, well, hold on here. What's this White House person trying to get done? Who are they doing it for? Okay, what's the storyboard look like? Okay, now, where does technology play a role and where does security play a role?
Yeah, I think that's when I think about my own career and I think about other security leaders that I know, I think that's one of the really interesting, I guess, epiphanies you need to have when you get to that level is it's not really all about the technology, right? And I think growing up in a technical track, a lot of people who become CISOs think it's the application of technology, and it's really more the application of that human connection and the education around what's trying to be done and the understanding of what they're trying to accomplish to then try to figure out how to apply the tech correctly to it. Sounds like you agree with that.
Definitely do.
Yeah. So any interesting insights that, going into that White House CIO role that you didn't really expect going in and the challenges of operating in an environment like the White House? I mean, a large financial, certainly a lot of security threats and concerns, but it must be totally different at the White House. So what's your perspective on that?
It's interesting you say that because, besides that aha moment about I've got to change this mindset, I remember even during the interview process, because most of the questions that I had, they couldn't answer because I didn't have clearance.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like, kind of can't answer you. And so finally, I got to the end and of asking different questions, and most of them they couldn't answer. And then they said, well, do you have any other questions? And I said, yeah, well, I do have one that I think you should be able to answer, which is, since I don't know a whole lot about the job because it's classified, how do you know I'm qualified to do this job? And it was really interesting, the answer, Ben. And the answer was financial services is 24/7. If it's down, people notice. You're in a heavily regulated environment. You can't have, failure is really not an option. You have to have huge availability and uptime. You're global. Your customers are mobile. Like, you have lots of different technologies. You service lots of different delivery channels. And they said, what you don't know, we'll teach you.
Yeah, that's a interesting thing. Again, it goes back to it being more about the people, right, and less about the technology. So working across government and private enterprise, where do you think you've seen the biggest disconnect in cybersecurity priorities?
This is another good one because, I like to the analogy I like to use is when I go into pretty much any high rise in the modern world, almost any place in the modern world, I go into a high rise and I don't ask myself, I don't say, gosh, I hope at the end, after they put the elevator in, that they had the security people come in and make sure it's really secure.
Yeah.
Like it's just secure by design. People go to civil engineering and architectural school and design school, and they know how to design a building from the ground up to make sure it's safe. The elevator company knows how to design to make sure it's safe. And then you have inspectors to just make sure everything's put together the way it is. Why don't we do that with technology? So that to me ends up being
Such an interesting question. I love that perspective. Like, nobody gets into the elevator and been like, yeah, we don't really need to make sure this gets all the way up to the top. Like 80% is good enough.
we're going to mitigate that risk. What's the mitigating control here? That maybe we've got some unforeseen vulnerability. And it's like, no, we don't tolerate that. And so I think, to me, a lot of times that disconnect that I see in enterprise is we don't think about it like we think about building a building. We don't think about, at the very beginning, what are the non-negotiables here? And so it's not built the right way. And then security comes in at the end and has to say no or hold things up, or they're trying to bolt things on. I mean, can you imagine? We would have completely different outcomes in buildings if the people that were the secure by design building people showed up at the end and they're like, oh my gosh, okay, we're going to hammer here. Did the best we could, but it works. So I all that to say, we have to change our mindset, and it starts with, again, that human user story, like really saying, what are we as a company? What's our mission? What's our vision? What's our value proposition? And really having the technologists at the room from the beginning, not just security. Security cannot be a standalone thing anymore. And I think
it reminds me of Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, right? Like that's kind of what you're talking about, right? Is like, we need to have that aha epiphany moment and just kind of change our approach to how we handle security.
Yeah. And even sort of the mindset, which is like, oh, we have to go get the wizards of this topic to come in and talk to us about this topic. It's like, it's too late at that point. Like, it has to be like, as soon as you do the blueprint for how people, process, and technology are going to work, it has to be in the blueprint, and it has to actually be in the mindset of everybody that works on the blueprint. I mean, really,
why don't we do that? Like, how do we bridge that gap? What is the aha moment, or how do you compel people to think about it differently?
It starts with us. It starts with how security. I can't tell you how many times I talk to very talented chief information security officers, talented, accomplished, have done amazing things. and they'll say to me, well, this is what I'm going to go present to the board. And I'd say, you cannot present that to the board. This is too much detail and in the weeds. It's not governance, it's management. And the board is not management. And they'll say, well, I'm going to take this to my CEO. I'm like, you cannot take that to your CEO. And they'll say to me, but they must understand. I'm like, no, they don't have to understand. They pay you to understand.
Okay.
So how do you bring it up a level? And so it starts with us, and it starts with how our mindset shift has to be, no, we need to understand. Right. And so instead, everybody wants, you have to understand NIST. You have to understand there's these 100 controls. You have to understand there's this regulatory framework. And it's like, no, like nobody sits there. Like, look at accounting, for example. You rarely hear the accounting team say to your CEO, well, IRS tax code law says blah, blah. Like they don't talk in terms of like, so we have to, but we haven't been around as long as some of the other disciplines in business. So we're still maturing. I mean, actually, grace here on that. We're still maturing as a profession, both tech and security, right? And finance has been around a long time. Accounting's been around a long time. Legal profession, I mean, they were paid by the word back in the day. So we're still a newer part, and we're still maturing in our professionalism. But we do have to change our own mindset.
So I want to dig into that a little bit, because you bring up kind of an interesting point, but there's been a lot of discussion. Well, a lot. I just think a lot of people are discussing it. I don't know if there's been a lot of the right discussion, but this concept that, CISOs need to be on corporate boards, that boards themselves need to have representation of technology and security on the board. If you think back to SOX, before SOX controls came into place, you really didn't have to know how to read a balance sheet, right? To be talking about financials. And now it's kind of, they built that muscle memory. You say people don't bring up, the regulations about financial or legal on the board, but yet I think a lot of people have that innate expertise, or someone on the board has that expertise where they kind of understand it. And so you're not trying to bridge that gap. Do you favor, or do you not think that there's a requirement to have kind of technical understanding and technical expertise on the board, as all companies are technology companies now, right? Again, whether you're doing something very manual or you're very e-centered, you still have a big presence. It's email, it's financial accounting, it's all that stuff is happening in an electronic domain. Do you think the board actually needs expertise, or are you an advocate for, I don't really think they do, and we just need to handle that?
I think it depends. And I've heard people say you have to have a CISO on every publicly traded company board. I respectfully disagree with that. And the reason why I say that is a board is responsible for governance, not management. So depending on the background of the board and the business that they're in, remember, there's only so many seats on a board.
Sure.
And so here's what I would say too. How many CISOs have a background that you can add value beyond security?
Yeah. And that's part of the challenge, where I think when we talk about CISOs being business leaders, we're not doing anything to educate them to be business leaders, right?
Right.
It's kind of a partnership that has to happen. Yes, we have to bring the tech and the security, but I feel like we have to do a good job. Boards, the rest of the leadership team needs to do a good job of mentoring people to be true business leaders in the environment.
Yeah. So you can't, because if you think about like the board table and the makeup of governance, so do you have to have a CIO on the board? Do you have to have an AI expert on the board? Do you have to have, a risk expert on the board, an audit expert on the board, a marketing person on the board? Like, if you think about all the things that make a business run, you can't have every single element sitting on the board. Now, a board, if nobody on the board had any tech expertise or risk expertise, or, then I would say you need somebody who's at least had responsibility for technology operations and security. But to say you have to reserve a seat for one practitioner when it's a governance role, not all firms need that, but some do. Some industries, absolutely, I would recommend, if they have an opportunity to add a new board seat or Maybe they've already got it, 3 of one kind of board member. Maybe when a slot opens up, it's an opportunity to add somebody who has that in their background. But it is hard because I'm very fortunate that I got the opportunity to hop around a lot in financial services. So I wasn't just a developer. I wasn't just an analyst. I wasn't just a model builder. I was an internal consultant. So I had lots of different roles, including responsibility for when I delivered technology. I had P&L responsibility for that technology, actually doing ROI and all those things. And so I draw upon all those experiences as a board member. But if I hadn't had those experiences, that's a lot of meetings where you cannot contribute because you just don't have those experiences.
Yeah, and I do think that's where a lot of CISOs trying to get that spot don't realize. I mean, you haven't had P&L responsibility. Like, how would you participate in those discussions? So, yeah, I think that's really insightful. So, as we think about the actors and the threat actors in the environment, it's like nation state threats have really kind of exploded in scope and scale. And we're seeing a lot of that. It's almost, the hot war that's not hot, right? Are public-private partnerships with the government really working? Are we still too siloed to respond effectively? How do we start to think about this differently, right? Because it is an asymmetric kind of battle going on.
A public-private partnership is incredibly helpful. I'm a huge fan of I tell people all the time, if you haven't developed a relationship with your local FBI office and join InfraGard, you're missing out. Full disclosure, I was a co-VP of North Carolina InfraGard for a long time. But, they're seeing how criminals are breaking into companies. And without telling you the victim's name, they can tell you a lot of things. So if you're on the proactive side, there's a lot of things they can tell you to say, oh, you're a manufacturer. Well, let me tell you, in the last 12 to 18 months, 70 manufacturers, we worked these cases. What we found is the actors kind of behave this way. You should look for these files, et cetera. And then you develop this like local relationship with them. So in the event you do have an incident, now you got somebody you know and trust that probably met your internal counsel, and you could say, look, can you tell me a little bit more about what's going on here? Have you seen anybody else go through this? So public-private partnerships, I think, are valuable, but you have to look at the numbers too. So you look at what we've spent, and what each nation spends, not just the United States. You look at what is spent on government organizations to do, threat intel and research and bulletins and things like that. And you have to ask yourself, are these methods going to be the methods that get us from 2025 to 2030? There's always, I think, a very healthy time every couple of years to evaluate and look and say, are we getting the expected outcomes we wanted? And for the next 5 years, are these the right activities to still be doing? Or is there a set of activities we should stop doing because the private sector is doing it better? And we should focus on this because we want to push the private sector to own this in the future. So there could be a really good, I think, push and pull from the two. But if we're both doing the same things, I don't think that's super effective. So think about this, for example. Pre-CISA, so this would be like NKIC days. They came out with early warning indicators. So non-classified work products and my team actually worked on this with the US CERT and NKIC. And it would be an early warning indicator. It wasn't classified. It was something that could be very quickly pushed out to the private sector. And it would say, this is an early warning indicator. This information could change, but here's what we know. So you could push it out and nobody else was doing that. The product companies weren't doing that then. And so, what a great service for everybody. Well, now almost every product company does it because they want to show, my product saw this.
Yeah, show
If
the value.
you had a product, you would know this. I'm just going to show everybody else what you're missing out on, right? So should the government still keep doing that? That's not a question for me to answer, but it is a question for me to pose to say, well, if you stop doing that because everybody else is doing it for you, could you take those resources and do something the private sector is not doing? And, so could we do more push and pull where we're complementing and enhancing versus overlapping?
Yeah, I like that. Makes sense. So, when we think about cybercrime and think about, is it nation state? Is it just criminal? The ransomware space, right? With ransomware attacks really increasing, we've seen a ton of it, right? The volume of it go up, the impact go up, right? Kind of industry wide impact in some cases. Are we really prepared for what could potentially be a catastrophic event? I mean, do you think about that as, yeah, we're one step away from this getting really, really bad? Or do you think we're kind of holding our own against it? Are we underestimating the impact, the potential?
I so I'll and I'm not blaming any administration for, I mean, because every administration has had to deal with things in the United States, right? And so, but I think back, like in the Biden administration, you had Colonial Pipeline, and I live in North Carolina. I don't see fistfights at gas stations very often. And you think back to Colonial Pipeline, and literally, like, we had somebody to, drop off for a college thing, and we had this and that going on. I'm like, I don't know if we're going to have gas.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there waiting in line, and I saw more than one fistfight going on at gas stations in North Carolina, which that is not a common thing to see. And thankfully, we got to a good place and, could kind of get past what happened there. But I think that's just as kind of a small example of how bad it could be if we get something really wrong, whether it's on critical infrastructure, especially transportation, food. So I do worry about that. I know we do a lot of disaster planning exercises, both for natural disasters, and I consider cybercrime to be a man-made disaster.
Hmm.
And so I know we do a lot of that, which is good. But if solar winds, Kaseya, Colonial Pipeline, all the ransomware things that happened last year is any indication
Healthcare.
of what's coming, it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, I feel like we keep having these things, but we're not really, we're not learning from them sufficiently, right? Like, I feel like, so you mentioned Colonial specifically. I don't know that I feel confident that another Colonial or some other company couldn't happen tomorrow, and we would look back and call out some of the same things on the Colonial side, right? If Change Healthcare, like from either on the healthcare or some other supply chain issue, if that happened tomorrow, it wouldn't surprise me. I wouldn't wake up and be like, wow, I didn't see that coming at all. And so why aren't we doing something? Why aren't we getting in front of this? Is it the private side not responding and understanding? Is it like, how much role does the government have there? There's a ton to go down this line of questioning here, but yeah, what thoughts?
I mean, I think it goes back to my building analogy initially, right? And so very few modern day buildings have like complete structural catastrophes without some monumental impact, right? So we had the horrible tragedy in the United States in Miami when that one building collapsed and trapped people and killed so many people. And you look back at when it was built, and it was different building codes. They knew they were in violation of those building codes. And, so there's a lot of lessons learned from that are being implemented that are very expensive to implement for any new buildings that are being built, but obviously necessary. And you're right. Like, think about, this was a long time ago. And for people young in their career, they may be like, what is she talking about? Remember what happened to Sony?
Yes.
And because they put out that movie, the caricature of Kim Il-jung, and then they didn't like how he was portrayed, and they came after Sony. Sony literally was working off of Post-it notes, and they found an old box of Blackberries that weren't connected to anything. Like they had no way to communicate. And I remember at the time thinking, maybe this is our moment. Like maybe this is our moment where everybody changes. And like, that was a long time ago. And I'm sure, like, seriously, young people, if you're listening to Ben and I talking right now, go look it up. Go look it up. And so that's why I keep saying our mindset has to change. And we have to go back and say, like, when did we decide from a building and architecture standpoint in the physical world that this is unacceptable? And so there's building codes and building standards that have to be applied to every building. if you're a single family dwelling, it's this. If it's a high rise, it's this. We have to move to that mindset.
Do you think it's a challenge in the, so when you think about changing that mindset, you talk about building codes, right? We're obviously touching a little bit on regulation, right? And I've said many times on this podcast and other things that I'm not a huge fan of regulation. I think that it can be challenging, right? But regulation has to come in sometimes when the industry isn't doing enough on its own. And I wonder if, building codes, people can understand the physical of a building code, right? But the nuance of cyber sometimes is really hard for people who are outside of the industry to understand. And I wonder, are legislators ever going to be able to comprehend that and actually put good legislation in place? Like I think every time something comes out, legislation wise, we look at it, we think, oh, this is going to be the moment. And we look at the legislation, we're like, yeah, this didn't even go close enough to what needs to be there. So do you think that disconnect is the problem? Will we bridge that? Because almost everybody now, like kids now, you're mentioning kids, have grown up in this digital world, right? I don't think, a lot of kids don't know how to write a check. A lot of kids don't know how to actually run a business off of pen and paper and write a real letter. So is that going to work?
Well, I'll just give you another example of mindset, right? So if you walk into a building and a ceiling tile crashes on your head, nobody says to you, that's your fault for walking into the building. It's standing there. But the way EULAs and T's and C's are created by lawyers of product firms, as soon as you have a breach, it's your fault.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And so again, the mindset.
The expectation that you even read the EULA is non-existent. Like it's just known that you can put whatever you want in it. But you're going to buy an iPhone whether you read it or not. Like it doesn't like.
Well, I'm going to tell you. So when it comes to the more generic EULAs, that are not like proprietary and things like that, I upload them to Grok, and I literally say to Grok, tell me all the different ways they're going to screw me in this EULA if I sign it.
I love that.
Sorry, excuse my French. It's Friday, but
it's serious, right? Like that's great. I love it.
Yeah, and so, I mean, never do that with something proprietary with secret sauce and your name in it and everybody else's name in it. But it's a great way, like when somebody's like, you need to review this. It's like, really? Okay. And because you can at least do that first. And then of course, seek legal counsel because Grok is not a lawyer. But it's a great way to just sort of have something highlighted for you quickly and go, yeah, they probably could.
That's a good tip. I'm adding it to my list of things that takeaways from my discussions with Theresa. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Notebook LLM is also interesting too for PDFs because you could actually turn a PDF into a podcast. And I actually uploaded the early manuscript, not the final manuscript of my book, to Notebook LLM. And I said, turn Manipulated into a podcast that's easy for people to listen to. And it has a 12-minute man and woman talking to each other. And I literally played it for my husband. And he was like, what am I listening to? It's really interesting. And I said, it's literally AI. And he's like, I know they're talking about your book. And I said, it's literally AI. Like I just gave it the parameters and it's pretty cool. But seriously, we everything has to be reimagined. Everything. And
that's daunting.
But it can be done.
Sure.
It can absolutely be done. So we could say, hey, from 2025, this point forward, all new products when they're built, it's a different way of thinking about security. And it's on the owner of the building who's building the building, which means I'm sure lawyers of software product companies are going to be like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. But we need to shift that responsibility more on these software product companies. And now that's something that everybody understands. And I think if we could talk in terms of the physical world, and say, well, what's the reciprocal in the digital world? Now, of course, I'm sure software product companies like a Microsoft would say, well, it's not my fault if you don't update your product. So I think you could come out with a win-win. But I feel like right now, for the most part, it's a win-lose. I install your product, and if I don't become an engineer in your product, and I don't pay consultants who are engineers in your product, and I miss a configuration, and I get hacked, it's my responsibility, but it's your building.
Yeah, not a great solution.
We're never going to get ahead of this if we always say, spend a lot of money on the technology and then spend a lot of money on the security. And oh, by the way, you don't have the talent. We're never going to get ahead of this. We have got to change how we think about this ecosystem.
So you mentioned manipulated. And I want to ask a question regarding that and turning on AI a bit, right? So with the prevalence of AI, right? Everything moving in that direction and threat actors using AI. How concerned do you think we need to be about AI-based disinformation campaigns from our adversaries? And are we already behind the curve? Are we just missing the boat on this?
Yeah, we're behind the curve, and the challenge is that what I've seen evolve over the years. So it used to be fraudsters had a certain way of operating. Nation states had another way of operating, and then cybercrime syndicates had yet another way. And typically their techniques, tactics, and protocols, very few things in common. Financial motives and financial gain also very different. And typically nation states, there's a little bit of like political gain. And now it's like they're all members of the same crime family. But they're just like branches on the tree of the same crime family, because you're seeing the tactics, techniques, and protocols being shared, being blended. You're seeing nation states basically doing money laundering. You see nation state trained people moonlighting at night in cyber criminal syndicates. And it's all just started blend together where the fraudsters, it's hard to know where one ends and one begins. So it's cousins of the same crime family at this point. And as it relates to sort of AI and the misuse of AI, they're already using it. And so whether it's using it to trick a retired teacher into thinking she is a part of, a fan club of a celebrity and donating to their charity, to an employee of a company who's like, look, our protocol to do wire transfers is I get on a video call with my executives. They got on a video call with the executives. They did the wire transfer, except for all the executives. We're not humans.
Yeah.
Deepfake videos. So we're already here. And again, we know this is here, and we can outthink, outsmart, and outdesign. And there are technologies we could be using that tell you, is this an authentic voice? Like, am I using my voice with you, or am I typing into a script and you're getting a computer generated voice? I mean, there is technology to tell us that. It's just not.
I should have asked you to turn to the side and touch your face.
Yeah, but I mean, again, it's not built in by design into the products we're using.
Yep.
But if we want to go back to, we put up with this for a long time in our world history of like, well, I hope this building's safe. And now we don't put up with that. And so we say the building better be safe. And it can be done.
Yeah, it's almost a transfer of the expectation, right? We expect that the safety in a building or a physical environment or a car, like if it's not done, it's negligence on the part of the manufacturer. Whereas in cyber, it's not really negligence. It's just, part of the design or lack of.
And again, if you think about it from a technology perspective, we're not as mature as car manufacturing. We're not as, Henry Ford and the automobile was way before computers were in homes and workplaces. So it's going to be a natural part of how we evolve technology and operations, but it does need to happen.
So, when we think about attacks and somebody actually getting compromised, you've been part of this public conversation through media, TV, and you've advised companies. When an event like a ransomware or some other cybercrime event hits a company, what advice do you give that leadership about handling messaging about that attack afterwards, right? Because I think that's one of the most critical things is, okay, we've had something happen. How do we message? How do we communicate? How do we effectively tell the story of what's going on and brief others? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, ideally, everybody should work on their holding statements now, not during an emergency.
Yeah.
So you really want to have those you're going to change them. They're going to change in that moment because every scenario is different, but you need holding statements for everything from, there's some natural disasters going on right now. There's fires right now in Western North Carolina. Same people that were hit by the hurricane. So you need a holding statement for when you have disruption of business because you may have things located in that area or customers in that area. It's the same thing for cyber incidents and technology outages. By the way, you're going to have the chances of a technology outage that is not cyber related is way higher than a cyber incident. But holding statements are a great thing to work on when you're not in an emergency. Then my biggest piece of advice during an emergency is be careful about absolutes, but also be transparent. So you don't want to say the first answer you got from your technology team, your vendor, your provider, your incident responders, that is not actually going to be the last answer. And I think that's the biggest thing for groups that this is their first time through. I've literally lost count how many of these I've had a front row seat to. So I always say to people, I would love to see what the lawyers and the PR media experts have had to say, because that's not my expertise. But let me look at it. And what I can do is say to you, I wouldn't be absolute on this because this is something in my experience typically changes. That would be things like saying number of records or no client data was impacted. Wouldn't do that. I would
just no absolutes ever.
Yeah, no absolutes. Yeah, no but you can say things like, again, and I will defer to the PR comms, the actual CEO, and the lawyers, but typically I'll say to them, it's okay to say things like, at this point in our investigation, we have not seen indication of, or we have seen indication of. So that way you kind of let people know we're not done, but here's what we know so far. And I always say people will forgive you if you're transparent and honest and tell them what you know. Tell them the next time you're going to tell them what you know. The other thing I will encourage people, because I've lived through this with organizations, is work on a playbook that gets you to the point where you never have to pay. Even if it means you're going to have disruption of services for some period of time. People will forgive you if you are transparent and honest and tell them the reason why there's a disruption in service is because we're not going to. You got to be careful on that messaging because you don't want to.
So you come out on the no pay decision for ransomware, because that's often a very hotly debated topic is, do we pay or don't we pay, right? And I know a lot of people make the decision we're not going to pay, but in an actual event, they flip the script and decide to pay, right? Because the outage is too much. So.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, it's a very lonely position to have, but I have successfully navigated many clients preparing before an event happens to be in a position to not have to pay. So for example, having hot site failovers and cold storage, not connected to the network failovers, having data loss prevention technology, having anomalous threat detection technology, implementing, I like to call it no trust architecture. So, again, and then encryption. Maybe they stole something and it's just not even valuable. Maybe they stole something, but they didn't get very much. So all of those different types of things that put you in a position to not to have to pay. Rebuilding an environment, getting the key is, this is something you guys do so well. Like getting the key, we all know, is like, please, you're negotiating with criminals who are also, by the way, financial terrorists, because they're like, if you want it, you can come get it, but you got to pay for it. That's
the expectation that you're going to get, one, that you're going to get what you pay for, two, that what you get is actually going to work successfully, right? Like I've seen keys be provided and they don't really decrypt everything, right? The decryption tech, they're good at causing pain, but not really experts in cryptology. So the decryption algorithm might just scramble stuff even worse. Like it's not a great situation. And then the affiliate may just decide they're not going to pay everybody else in the chain and they're not going to give you the data back, or they'll still hold you hostage. There's no honor among thieves. Like that expectation boggles my mind.
And when I sit down and tell, and so it's so interesting because you'll have, external counsel that, they've got their playbook and it always has to be this way. And this is how it always goes.
Playbook. Yeah.
Yeah. And you've got incident response firms, all due respect to my colleagues, are like, this is how it goes. And we talked to the threat actor and this is how it goes. And it's like, guys, with all due respect, patient outcomes.
Yeah.
We have a victim right here that you're saying all this in front of. And it's their time, and they're broken. And maybe there's a better way than how you show up every day and have shown up for the last 3+ years. I see them, there's certain groups, they just show up and it's like the same way every day, and the patient outcomes are not improving, they're actually getting worse. So it's a lonely position. I know you guys share my position, which is why you do what you do.
Yeah.
And but it is tough because some companies are not in a position to not pay. And for them, like when I meet them for the first time and I'm meeting them and they're going through this and I say, well, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? What do you have? And you realize, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And it is, and you say, well, you don't have to pay, but this is what it looks like.
Yeah. That's the pain.
And you just, like, my heart just breaks. It is such a hard decision to watch somebody else make. And so I never judge a firm that says, I felt forced to pay. And I say, I'm so sorry. Let me help you, because re-victimization is a real thing then. It's awful.
Well, we see it happen, like statistically, we see if somebody gets hit with ransomware, right? Like they pay, they become a mark. Like people know that they're going to pay, so they're reinfected 2, 3, 4 times again because people just know that they're going to pay, right? And so it's even worse when you get re-victimized like that.
Yes. And so I always say, let me help you. So the next time something happens, you're in a position to just don't provoke the threat actor, but don't pay.
So let's talk about something that's controversial with regard to payments. Do you believe from a federal policy level, right, that we should ban the payments of ransomware? Because making the payments, it does the same thing as we talked about on the individual level, on a global and a national level. Making a payment just incentivizes the actor to know that they can, if they don't hit you, they hit somebody else and they'll probably get a payment, right? And the payments are quite large. So one of the things that's been bandied about is we put a national ban in place, and it probably would have to be global or at least among the major countries, right? Because if it's just one country, it's not going to have much effect. The UK has talked about this. But banning the payment, actually getting in front of it and saying, hey, I can't make a payment. We do it for OFAC countries. What about everybody else? Do we just say you can't do it?
I appreciate this question, Ben, because here we are again. Patient outcomes. The banning of payment is now on the shoulders of the victim.
Yeah.
And why are we here to begin with? I still remember it plain as day. The first time I got a call on a ransomware case, this is many years ago, and the client said, I don't want to pay, but my insurance company is telling me to pay. Can you help me? This is many years ago. I'm not going to name who the client was.
Yeah.
And I said to the cyber liability insurance company, why are you making them pay? They already have a roadmap. They already know what they're going to do. All they're going to do is accelerate their technology refresh. And basically they're going to build the new environment, move to the new environment, and just ditch this, right? And they have hot failover, they have cold storage. We can do the forensics. My team can get to the point, we don't need to pay. And basically, insurance company said it's cheaper to pay for that than to pay for the other. And I said, not in the long run. They're like,
yeah.
What are you talking about? You're creating the schoolyard bully. I still remember this so many years ago. And I've got my client sitting right there and we're talking to the insurance company. And I was incredulous because I said, you guys are going to create an unsustainable insurance system, because what's going to happen is you're creating a scenario where they're going to target people. They're going to look for their insurance policy. They're going to tell them to pay because they know you're going to tell them to pay. And I said, this is wrong. And we shouldn't, like, once you go down this road, it's slippery slope.
Can't stop. Yeah.
And look where we are now, Ben. So banning the victim who is now a sick patient from paying is the wrong place in the chain. So if you look at that whole kill chain, it should have started with the insurance company.
Mm-hmm.
So if the government wants to do some burdensome regulation that I don't think is going to make a difference, you do it to the cyber liability insurance companies and you say, you're going to pay for recovery, not for paying ransom.
I like that. Yeah.
Again, sometimes I just want to go be a national park ranger. Like, I just want to ride a horse and I just...
Bears are a big problem. Bears are a big problem, Theresa. You don't want to...
So, I mean, but in all seriousness, we have to change our mindset. And the way your company focuses on the client and the problem is an example of a new way of thinking about this issue. And so that's why I'm so glad we're having this conversation today, Ben, because hopefully people will listen and say, I don't want to pay either. And I tell people, I said, you sit down with your cyber liability insurance company and say, I want to never pay ransom. So you tell me, what do you need to see from me?
Yeah, to not pay it.
To not pay ransom, to not force me into paying ransom because you won't pay for recovery. What do you need to see from me? How many? And I say, ask your insurance provider. How many clients did you force into paying? How many clients did you pay for recovery instead of paying the ransom?
Yeah, I think you should really have those discussions. You have to understand what I think a lot of people get into that not understanding what the policy covers, doesn't cover, and what the actual implication would be like.
Also, if you can do it, I'm just saying, think about self-insurance. Just put that out.
I have seen some companies do that. Yeah. So down this thread just a little bit deeper. So Anthony and I have this debate all the time. Ransomware groups classify them as terrorist organizations and actually create action on that level against them, or no?
I think
it's terrorism.
I think it depends on what they're doing.
Okay.
So if you are, let's go back to the kinetic space. So if another country's planes invade our airspace and they don't respond to us saying, excuse me, you don't have permission to fly over here, there is a playbook for what our actions and reactions to invasion of our airspace, our sea space, going after our underground oil reserves. There is a playbook for those actions. And we're still figuring out the playbook really in the digital realm. And so I think we have to go back to sort of, well, what's the kinetic impact of what they're doing? So if they're holding 35 hospitals for ransom, people can't get life-saving treatment, life-saving surgeries, whatever it is that the equivalent of they dropped a bomb on a building?
That's been my thing, is I think it's the lack of being able to directly attribute it to some physical thing that people don't want to make the association that it has the same effect as kinetics. But we've seen patient deaths, right? We know that there's attributable patient deaths. Like, yeah, that can be calculated.
So if you had an organization come in and say, I'm going to block everybody from getting into this hospital, what would we call that? If they set it on fire, if they bomb. So the hospital is rendered inoperable for some extended period of time. So the question is lives have been impacted. I think we can, my opinion is each one of these ransomware syndicates, when they do what they do, there is a kinetic response that happens. Money doesn't move if it's a bank.
Yeah.
Gas doesn't get in cars, and goods and services can't transport if it's a gas company. I mean, there is a true kinetic response, and depending on what that kinetic response is to being locked up for ransom, that could potentially be labeled terrorism.
Yeah, I always draw the line with Anthony on terrorism is some type of action installing fear for a political gain, right? Like, and so I think yes, in some cases, like it's not necessarily terrorism; it's some type of crime, but it does have the same kinetic output that we would treat a similar criminal activity in a different way. And so I'd really like to see something further done. I don't think we do enough on the nation to nation level of some type of, whether it's sanctions, whether it's warnings, like something of like, you're harboring these groups and allowing them to operate. As a result, there is some action that happens. Maybe it's not a kinetic response, but it is something to cause pain to incentivize you to stop sponsoring these people. And if we can track them down, to do something directly of some type of kinetic action.
And you brought up sanctions, Ben. So, I mean, think about this. Who are the countries that are some of the have the best, most sophisticated, active ransomware syndicates in the world? Name the countries, Ben.
China, Russia, Iran. I mean, like we all know the top, right? North Korea.
Yep. And what do they all have in common politically with the United States and the EU?
Yeah,
They're under economic sanctions.
Yeah.
So how are they getting around those economic sanctions?
Ransomware.
Ransomware is just money laundering.
Yeah, it's all it is. It's all it is. Yeah.
It's all it is. So, okay, you're going to have me under economic sanctions? Fine. I'm going to commit an act of terrorism. I'm going to lock up a private infrastructure. I'm going to make them pay me money. And I know insurance companies will do it because they've done it. And because they paid me money in cryptocurrency, I'm just going to move it around. And now I got money.
Yeah.
And so we are funding kinetic terrorism against us and against our allies every single time we pay ransom. And why? And it's just like this. It's a downward death spiral that is no good. So why don't we again, instead of putting this on the business? I mean, in poor hospitals, I can't even. Businesses have their own set of challenges, but hospitals, many of them are nonprofits.
Yeah. Serving
the underserved. And they're
I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen those negotiations where it's like, hey, we don't have the money to pay the ransom. Like this is you're completely even out of scope from where we could pay. And no, okay, we don't care.
Yeah, but they don't care. And it's just, there is no honor among thieves. And so let's not put that on the victim. If we're going to have a regulation saying we don't want to pay ransom, and somebody feels like they really want to have a regulation. I mean, gosh, we can't get anything passed on the Hill, past company included, right? Past administration, current administration. Like we can't get stuff passed on the Hill. Can't even get the take it down bill. Like, excuse me.
Yeah.
People have intimate imagery of them online against their will. Deepfake pornography made of them online against their will. We can't we can't agree on a law that gives a victim the right to get that taken down. Because it's free speech? Baloney. So same thing here. Why would we basically penalize the victim again by saying, I know you're in a spot where you only can pay ransom. That's the only way you can be operational again. We're going to fine you for doing that. What? No. Why don't you do that to the insurance company?
Yeah. No.
Sorry. No passion on this issue at all, Ben.
We're both passionate. We live on that same lonely island.
It's just a few of us there, not many.
So on that theme, to me, cybersecurity often feels like it's a losing battle, right? Like we're always kind of behind the eight ball. And I wonder sometimes, are we investing in the right things, or do we get too distracted, right? I think about AI and the current hype cycle around it. And well, I think we talked about this a little bit before, the lack of good asset management and vulnerability management, like just core hygiene stuff. But we quickly forget that. We just move on to whatever the sexy, shiny ball is, and it's AI right now, right? Are we too distracted by the hype cycle and the buzzwords? Like, do we need to double down, or is there value in chasing these things as they come up? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, maybe, but I do want to celebrate some wins that I think are kind of cool. So like, for example, like I tell companies all the time, have a deep fake passphrase that's not easily guessed. So remember that young associate at a company who fell prey to the deep fake videos, right? So that person did everything right. Well, we actually train our clients on a whole different level of protocol. Of course, I was in financial services, so I know the things I know what the fraudsters are looking for. So I tell them, sit down with your bankers and set it up this way. But then we've, for a long time, have said, besides having a domain name that's not your public facing domain name for money movement and a set of credentials and things like that, we also have them have a passphrase, something that, and they have like a rotating passphrase that is not easily guessed by looking at publicly available information. And we always tell them, if you forget your training, just try to remember something only the two of you would know. And so we literally had just trained a firm on this whole protocol that we do with our clients. And they had this huge charity event, big media event, ribbon cutting, a whole 9 yards. And then the CFO gets a call from the CEO. And the call is, I'm going to send you some bank instructions for wiring the funds. And it was the amount that was announced. It's the CEO's voice. And the CFO's like, I cannot remember the passphrase. And I don't want to let the boss know I don't know the passphrase. So he remembers from the training, make it something so he says, hey, boss, I was in your office. Before I ask you for the passphrase, I was in your office and you held up this book and said, you must read it. And I forgot to write it down. What is it? And the line went dead.
I love it.
Dang. So then he called the CEO. And he's like, was that you? And he goes, what? So they had a good laugh. So how much does it cost, Ben, to have that protocol?
Yeah, nothing.
We were already helping them with other stuff anyways, came up with the playbook, trained everybody on it, 30 minutes of their time to look at the new processes, cost them nothing. But had that person convinced him, could have been $1 million or more out the door for this. They thinking they're giving it to the charity, but instead,
and I tell everybody, simple things like that, you need to take that into your own personal life as well, right? Like you need to tell your kids, here's how we're going to handle this. You need to tell your wife, here's how we're going to handle this, because that's starting to transition over, right? I mean, I think as we see, AI and deepfakes become easier and easier and harder to detect, we're going to see this transition, right? And people are going to look for things that they've extorted from companies and documents and information, things that are going to indicate about personal details. They're going to take that and use it as an additional way to extort your personal information as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So taking that up a bit, on Hunted, you've talked about digital breadcrumbs and human behavior being leveraged to track people down. What about the amount of information that people overshare, through social media and other things that gives people way too much insight into their personal details, right? That puts them in point of compromise, either corporately or personally. Have anything to opine about that? Digital breadcrumbs, right? Things people leave out there as tidbits that people can use to track them down, find them, determine what they're doing. What are your thoughts on, either from a corporate perspective or a personal perspective, on how much people overshare and give people information that they shouldn't, and then how's that used for manipulation?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one because everybody wants to stay in touch with their former coworkers, your family. I mean, during the pandemic, what a great way to stay in touch and keep tabs on people during lockdown, social media. But at the same time, it does leave those digital breadcrumbs. And so, for example, I always tell people, don't post about where you are, post about where you were.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So subtle things like that. I know you love having your toes in the sand and the drink in the hand or whatever you're doing. Take those pictures. And then after you're safely back at home, then you can let people know. Because like you said earlier, Ben, virtual kidnapping is a real scam right now.
Yeah.
And it's very easy, especially in this age of algorithms, to just go through. We actually do a demonstration showing how you can go to LinkedIn and type in new job. And all these people you're not connected to come in a list.
Okay.
New job. So if I'm going to target a new person and pretend to be Ben Carr and say, hey, new person, this is Ben Carr. I need you to do your security training. And we have a separate security portal for HR. I can have a whole thing. And this really happened. This actually really happened to a client of ours. And so there was this fake portal, somebody masquerading as like the Ben Carr role. And they went after all new hires for this company. And they got takers who took the training, but in logging in for their security training, which there was security training there, they typed in their credentials. And it was cute. So we're all leaving these digital breadcrumbs and we don't even know we're doing it. And so I always just say to people, I have like this rule and I raise my kids on this rule and my employees laugh, but I talk about this rule at work all the time too. I'm like, you have a 2 persons over your shoulder rule. One is your granny, your grandma. And then one is a bad person who would do you or your loved ones or your colleagues harm. So if you're getting ready to post something online and your gram wouldn't approve, don't do it.
Yeah.
And if you're posting something online and somebody could use that to harm you, your loved ones, or your work colleagues, don't do it. It's a really simple rule.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. So, in all the things you've done, right, vast career, and look, I think from anybody who's been in this role a while, sometimes it beats you up a little bit, right? Like all the stuff, like we were just talking about these stories where we had people have had bad things happen to them. What keeps you inspired to really still be in the fight in cyber?
The wins, the other side of the incident, my team. I will say everybody has to find a way to stay grounded. So I would say my faith and my prayer life has never been better because I see a lot. And so I've just learned I got to rely on a higher power when I don't understand why bad things happen to good people. And that can be both in a personal sense, but also professional sense. And I just know that I mentioned this to you earlier prior to this conversation, that this is a career that came and found me. It was not in my plans to do any of this. And what a blessing that this career came and found me. And I do feel like I've been uniquely trained over the years and didn't even know it to be able to take the gifts I've been given to protect and defend other people. I come from this long line of military and law enforcement. And so I guess this is my way of protecting and taking care of everybody else. And if I didn't do it, who would do it? So that's what kind of motivates me to get up and maybe it was a tough day yesterday, but I always also say, like, you've got to look at every day and say, no matter what happens today, good, bad, or whatever, make it a good day because you're not going to get it back. And so find the blessing in the day, whatever that win was, and just really reflect on that blessing and that win. If you had some tough lessons learned that day, you don't want to sugarcoat over that. So you want to say, okay, what could we do better? How can I be a better version of myself? But that's really what gets me going. I'm a big fan of being analog. So people laugh because they're like, oh, are you gamer? I'm like, no. Like, I think the reason why I can get up and do what I do is like I get up very early in the morning and do my prayers. After I get out there and I go for a run. I'm a big outdoors person. So unless there's like, I don't know, wildfires going on or things like that, I really try to get out and run because that outdoor time just sort of resets and refocuses it.
Yeah, disconnect a little bit, right? Like I think you have to get away from the screens and kind of reconnect with yourself and what's important to you. So that's really good. So it kind of as a wrap up, I guess, final question for you. I like to ask a lot of guests is if you're advising a young you today, right? What advice would you give them and what would you say to them about, future career paths, journey ahead and how to get to the level of success that you've gotten to?
Sure. Well, for starters, I would tell them, because I have a lot of people say, I'm so behind, like people know this and people know that. And I'm like, you know what? We're all learning together. You're never behind. So people say, oh, I wish I'd studied this or I'm like, just jump in because technology is changing. Right. And so what we all know today is not what we're going to need to know tomorrow. And so just jump in. Don't have imposter syndrome. Just like get in there, ask people who seem to know what they're doing. What are you doing? How do you do this? So that would be my first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is, especially early on in your career, keep a little notebook at the end of the day and just jot down, like, why was today a great day? And if it wasn't such a great day, just note a few things about that. And over time, you're going to learn what are the things that you're just naturally gifted at that give you sort of your own internal energy, and sort of almost like it's sustainable and renewable. So, for example, maybe you had a great day because you finally convinced somebody in senior management to buy a tool or to go multi-factor authentication, or maybe you did a capture the flag exercise. Just kind of like take notes of that, because even though it'll change over the years as you're in your career, it's going to start to tell you things about yourself maybe you didn't know.
Hmm.
And that'll help you identify as you decide, hey, I want to be a generalist or a specialist. Or maybe you don't want to stay in cybersecurity forever. Maybe you want to take a stint in the business. Maybe you want to be in security for a little bit and go be a chief information officer. I was a chief information officer who had security responsibilities. So now I focus primarily on cybersecurity, but I still always have that CIO mindset in the back of my mind. So don't be afraid to try new things. And also just be a constant student of your profession. So the more you can do on your own to read forums, ask other people what they know, try things out, just the better and more enriching it's going to be. And then the biggest piece of all, be analog as much as you can. Hold yourself accountable. So I get it. Like, if you love what you do and then you love gaming and you feel like, well, that's my social network, you have got to find a way to be analog. So maybe making sure people in your area, you just go have coffee with them. Make sure, or go bowling. I don't know, find something. Be analog. And when you're doing that analog thing, put the phone down. I mean, unless you're on call, because that would be bad. But you know what I'm saying?
Put it in your pocket. Put it in your pocket. Yeah.
But, or look at it periodically to make sure you're living up to your SLAs. But seriously, I know it sounds countercultural because we're in tech and we're in security, but find those moments to truly be analog. Otherwise, you're never going to recharge and it's not going to be sustainable.
Theresa, really great conversation today. I appreciate you coming on and having a serious discussion with me. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been great to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate everyone tuning in, and hope you watch us on the next episode of Security Gets Serious.